maybe, Raphael, you can give me a sign if I have only 5 minutes left, okay? Because I'm speaking, I try to speak freely. Richard Ryder a few minutes ago asked me if I'm nervous, and I said, of course I am, and at least for 2 reasons. First reason is that's the first time I'm speaking at Cambridge, and that is a prestigious place. So I try to give a good presentation. And the second reason why I'm a little bit nervous is that I'm not a lawyer, and you are all, or most of you are experts in that field. And as you already announced, I'm just a political philosopher, so I'm neither a real political scientist, nor law, nor political. So I'm in between. And this is what I'm trying to do now. I want to talk about relationships between 3 dimensions that I think are crucial if we want to grasp the idea of rights. And we use the term foundations. That's a rather strong term, and in philosophy it's always contested whether there are foundations. So for example, it is contested whether we need a moral foundation for legal rights or for law. But I would say yes, in a way, reflection upon animal rights has to start with morality, because ultimately it is a matter of morals whether we are obliged to try to realize animal rights also in the domain of law and by means of politics. And of course, the first question then is whether there are animal rights in this moral sense at all. And this is also contested. So if you're not so familiar with philosophy, I can just tell you almost everything is contested. And I cannot, of course, defend the idea that there are moral rights in detail, but just give you a sketch of my own approach, and then we will see whether it convinces you. So, roughly speaking, moral rights are a subtype of what the legal philosopher Joel Feinberg called valid claims. So I concentrate on claim rights. Valid means that they are in a way justified, and the justification that is crucial for moral rights, of course, is a moral justification. So ultimately, I would say, if there are moral rights, they stem from sufficiently convincing moral justification, and they are part of a system of moral norms that result out of that justification. One specificity of rights, I think, that makes them a necessary component of a convincing conception of morality is that they ground what one might call directed duties. Duties, the fulfillment of which is owed to particular others. Not all duties are of this type. You have rather general duties, for example, to cultivate your character. These are not directed duties. But if I owe something to Raphael in particular, for example, then Raphael has a normative authority against me that I fulfill a duty that is owed to him. And that is the sense of directedness that is crucial. That means, negatively speaking, if I fail to perform the duty I owe to Raphael, I do something wrong for the reason that I wrong someone, namely Raphael. So to wrong someone is only possible if this particular person has a valid claim against me as the duty holder. So that is, roughly speaking, the structure or part of the structure of moral rights. Claim rights always have 3 dimensions. They are claims of someone against some other person, the duty bearer, with regards to certain advantages or goods. Yeah. Okay. Now I said a valid claim needs a valid justification. And what is a valid moral justification? And to be sure, this is much too broad a topic for one 20 minutes talk. The 20 minutes are already a restriction that are hard to bear for me. But it's even an entire conference maybe would not be sufficient. So again, it's just a sketch. I think the idea of morals include the idea that moral norms are expected to become internalized by all normatively responsible agents. They are directed towards all of us insofar as we are normatively responsible. In order to give us reason to internalize them, they must be reasons that we can accept. And that means that all agents, all normatively responsible agents, can share the reasons that speak in favor of moral norms. Otherwise, these norms would not be valid. So, and then my argument is that a norm can only be acceptable from the perspective of all who are expected to respect this norm if the agents are also respected themselves as beings who have a life of their own, who have basic interests, and a system of morals must respect and protect the basic interests of all the agents of morality. Otherwise, I would not have a good, valid reason to internalize the norms and perform them. So, the idea behind it is a rather general ethical idea, namely that a successful life for each and every human being is of ultimate value for this particular being. And a system of morals can only be valid if it respects that. That means, in Kantian terms, so referring to the famous German philosopher Immanuel Kant, that a valid system of morals has to treat each of us as ends and not only as means. And from that, again, it's a very hasty way of presenting the argument, but just to get an idea. From that it follows, I guess, that the moral status that everyone has, the moral standing that results out of this kind of justification is what one might call a right to have rights. Some of you might know that Hannah Arendt made famous this phrase of a right to have rights. I do not refer specifically to Arendt's approach of the right to have rights, which is rather complicated. And my idea is, I think, more simple, a basic one, namely that each of us is entitled to those rights that are needed to count as an end and not only as a means in the system of morals. So that is the idea. And of course, all what I said up to that point sounds totally anthropocentric, because I talked about moral agents. And moral agents are expected to fulfill moral duties. And I want to presuppose that animals are not moral agents in that strict sense of being capable of following a system of norms out of insight into the validity of these very norms. This is, again, it's a bit contested, it's an empirical claim, but I would say if I have a sufficiently strong notion of what it means to have a moral system, then animals are not moral agents. And then analytic philosophers add, but this does not exclude that they could be moral patients, that we could owe them something. So, but how could we come from what resulted up to now, namely human rights, to animal rights? And here is one basic norm which I think no one could deny who takes morality and justice seriously, namely that we have to treat lives alike. Or more specifically, if you have a morally relevant feature, such as, for example, the interest in not feeling pain, then if this is morally relevant, it is morally relevant regardless of the particular individual in which it is instantiated. So whether it's an animal, or it's Raphael, or it's me, or even Federico. He's a skeptic about animal rights, but even Federico has a right on earth. So okay, that is the idea of treating likes alike. And now we might say, okay, are animals like us in at least some morally relevant regards? And here I think it's again an empirical claim, but I think a rather plausible one. We have to look at our own interests, and then we realize that the interests that we take to be morally relevant, that we take to be so important that we need them to be protected and respected in the form of human rights, among these interests are some which are basically shared by many other animals as well. They must not be identical in any regard in order to be shared. I already mentioned the interest in not suffer from pain, but you can have more sophisticated interests in emotional life, in social forms of connectedness with one's children, in roaming freely. I mean, corgis are social animals, so many animals, not all animals, have also social bonds, and so on and so forth. Philosophers in the Kantian tradition and in the contractualist tradition, for example, tend to concentrate exclusively on a particular subset of human specific interests, namely those that single us out as rational and reasonable beings. But this is clearly one-sided. We are rational beings and needy creatures at the same time. What makes torture, to take an extreme example, so seriously wrong is not simply the fact that it's an attempt to break one's will. It would be a Kantian answer. But what makes torture terrible is also the fact that we are reduced to suffering creatures, to creatures fearing for their lives, and whatever it is that torture consists in. And that, I think, is just one drastic example that might show sufficiently clearly that among the interests that we find are worth protecting in the form of human rights are those we have as needy creatures. And we all are these needy creatures. Not only the so-called human marginal cases, such as babies or mentally handicapped persons, but we all are needy creatures. And in that regard, I think there is sufficient similarity with many other kinds of animals. And if morality demands that we treat rights alike, then it would be arbitrary if we would not include animals into the realm of rights in the regards in which they are sufficiently like us. That's basically the argument. Now there are, of course, counter-arguments, and I will just concentrate on one and highlight two possible problems. It's the point that there is obviously a reciprocity between rights and duties. So if you take rights seriously, I must also take duties seriously. Duties stemming from rights are correlative to rights. And obviously, animals, as I said, are not duty bearers in the strict normative sense. I think, to make it short, it would be a mistake to say that because if you have a right, some other party must have a duty, that is a directed duty against you. The rights bearer and the duty bearer must be one and the same individual. That simply does not follow. You can be a rights bearer and a duty bearer, as we all are in some way, because we are all normatively responsible persons, but you can also have only rights, and what you then need is just another party that bears the corresponding duty. So in short, not only duty bearers can have rights. Otherwise, human babies or, again, the seriously handicapped humans couldn't have rights either. The second thing is, and it's again goes back to the terminology introduced by Joel Feinberg, that rights are claimable. So a claim right can be claimed. And again, if you do not have the normative concept of a right, you are not capable of claiming that right by yourself. And as I presupposed, animals have not the capacity to grasp the concept of a right because it's a normatively contentful concept, and so they cannot claim rights, as their rights. But claimability does just make necessary that there is someone who is capable of claiming, and the entire idea then would be that the perspective he or she then takes is the perspective of the animal who is the holder of the claim right. So there is a possibility of introducing proxies. which is, by the way, one advantage of legal rights, that in a legal system, if you have rights, you can then also specify proxies who defend these rights. Okay, I make the next two steps much shorter. I can do this because, as I already said, in a way I'm convinced that morals are the basis of what follows then. From moral rights, legal rights do not automatically follow, but of course it is in some regards rather helpful if rights are not mere moral rights, because moral rights are rather weak. They are in a way backed up only by moral sanctions. If you think that rights must also be backed up by sanctions, moral sanctions are rather weak, because they presuppose that someone in a way can be outraged and another one can be ashamed by not doing his duty. So it makes sense to say that, for example, human rights also need a backing by legal law. And I skip one point here, namely that I think that we still don't have legal rights for animals, at least not if we refer to the well-established animal welfare laws, as we have them, for example, in Germany, but I'm sure in Great Britain as well. These are not real animal rights, because welfare laws up to now do not take seriously what I think is the general idea of rights. And that is the idea that a holder of rights has a valid claim to one's own life according to his or her fundamental interests. And that excludes categorically that this individual is reduced to be a mere resource for other purposes. And that is what is ultimately the reality for many, many animals, the so-called Nutztiere. Animal husbandry normally rests on the presupposition that the animals are there to serve us. It might be okay that we take some advantage out of animals, but when we have to take seriously them as holders of rights, we can only do so if we accept their right to a life of their own according to their most fundamental interests. And that is not, of course, the case if you feel entitled to kill an animal for some gains on your side, as the taste of meat or of milk, cow milk, or whatever it is. Legal rights, of course, are important due to their enforceability. That is a claim most famously made by John Stuart Mill. And Mill said it might be the case that sometimes, although it would be good if a right could be legally enforced, could be backed up by legal sanctions, for contingent reasons this is not possible, because, for example, there is no democratic majority that would accept the legal enforcement of rights. And I think this is exactly the case with animal rights today. So if we would try to impose a vegan system on the world today, or even on democratic nation states such as Great Britain, or if it is a nation state, or Germany, then this would fail. And if we want to establish animals in accordance with democracy, what we first need, I guess, is a cultural revolution. So we must change the mindset of majorities of people. So we must enter into public reasoning, that's the domain of Federico, I know, and convince as many people as possible that animals should have also legal rights, because they have moral rights. But that is not the first step. So legal rights are not, I think, I mean, it makes sense to fight for legal rights in exemplary cases, such as in a case law of Argentine or other countries, as a kind of a door opener for the idea that animals can be subjects of rights also in the legal sense. But to be sure, ultimately, the domain in which the fate of animal rights is decided is not the legal domain, it's politics. So I think I have extended my time, and so I leave the political consequences up to you. Thank you very much.